begin, we're going to talk about the major themes. What crops to grow, which we've touched on a little bit, so maybe that part of this panel will be a little bit less. We need to talk about organic versus conventional. Is it true that we can grow organically in high tunnels? I think from my experience the answer is an emphatic yes. What crops to grow, when to plant, major varieties, putting the pieces together from your gentleman's perspective. And again, we do have Brad Bergerford of OSU, Ted Carey of Kansas State, Dave Schacht and Raymond Yoder for they both farm in Ohio. And I'd like to just put a question to the panel, if you will, to start out with. Organic and conventional, your experience with it. Ted, I know you have some experience with it, and could you give us a quick synopsis of your perspective on organic production in a tunnel?
Well, you saw that the setup, the aerial photo. We put organic and conventional side by side, and we thought that it was something we should do because we had organic growers and we had conventional growers, and it also gave us an opportunity to do some research to make some comparisons of nutritional value or insect management practices and so on and so forth. And so we've done some of that nutritional studies, and the answers are, well, it's complicated. We've also done just some observational studies. So we grew tomatoes in our organic system and our conventional, and cucumbers, and also inside and outside. And I didn't realize, actually I said I was kind of cavalier about saying, well, we'll do organic. And organic is actually, record keeping is really important. I kind of generally understood that, that there are differences between organic and conventional, and organic, you don't use synthetic substances. So, but then it becomes a little bit, you don't put any treated seed on, and, there are various, important aspects to that I kind of didn't realize. And if I'm making side-by-side comparisons and I'm using organic seed sources and conventional seed sources, well, anyway, that's not related to the question. But tomatoes. We grew tomatoes 2 years, inside, outside, organic and conventional, had no difference whatsoever. Organic versus conventional, they grow just as well, organically in our tunnels. We use, actually it's the same material, Bacillus thuringiensis or entrust to control worms. And so they're the same material, you just have to make sure that the one that you're putting on in the organic system is the organic one, because there's, I can't remember what it's called actually, the conventional entrust, Spintor, I think is what it is. Outside, of course, we got, just like Otho showed, foliar fungal diseases, like anything. So I think you can grow pesticide-free or reduced pesticide organic in high tunnels very easily, and a lot of organic growers have been growing in high tunnels very successfully. Elliot Coleman, Steve Moore, and so on and so forth. So it's really very, very compatible with either conventional or and let's see, this year I have the feeling that, I didn't keep on top of fertilization as well as I should have this year. So my organic were actually doing better than my conventional, because I've got this big reserve of organic matter, and they last year I was really on top of the fertigation and fertilization with my conventional. So, again, it's individual management, but the organic system was a little bit more forgiving this last year when I wasn't able to keep on top of things as well as I should have in terms of growing my conventional crops.
David, I know that you've got quite a busy high tunnel system going. From your perspective in terms of variety selection, planting schedules, harvesting schedules, labor management, again, we're talking about the biggest issues in what makes the farm or the operation, that part of the operation, work. What do you think are the most important factors when it comes to growing in the tunnel for you?
I think most of the points that you brought up have already been talked about and emphasized. Labor's an issue, timeliness, and we've repeated that many times. High tunnels don't work by themselves. It's more work and it's more management. and you have to have the labor there to do it when you need it. I just view, I've got a half acre of hay grow tunnels, 28 by 3 bays of 28 by 300. And I'm kind of just viewing this as, I'm doing a lot of kind of, you might say, unscientific experiments just to see what happens and see where I can push the limits and so on. So as far as good hard numbers, I'm just viewing this as a more of an experimental to see what works type thing.
Well, not good hard numbers, but your experience to this point, I mean, obviously you've been very active in the field for a long time. And tunnels are relatively new, I mean, to the farm. What's been your experience so far with that kind of ongoing tinkering on the farm?
Well, just the one thing that really hit home with those picture up there with outdoor disease versus the inside. I really lost my enthusiasm quick for my tomatoes because I was diagnosed with bacteria canker, and it's kind of like, well, when are they going to die, sort of thing. But so I thought, well, I'll just see what happens with them after you know they're kind of doomed to die. But it was really amazing to me that I only sprayed it once with a fungicide the whole season, and just fought early blight tooth and nail with the outdoor ones, and the other ones in the tunnel just because it kept the rain off. It just really didn't until we got this October weather where you did get a little bit of the rain blowing in the inside that the leaf diseases really showed up.
Raymond, you've seen quite a bit field and high tunnels, and I was wondering if you could share with us, putting all of that experience together, what would you consider to be the major factors for somebody who's now maybe, that the industry is experiencing, particularly the ones who've been working with high tunnels for a while, the major factors or the challenges that we're facing?
The major challenges I would say that we're facing with outside growth is diseases, as was mentioned before, versus in tunnel growth. We could probably be sure to avoid many of our sprays, and our disease would be much, much less. However, if we do go if we are into tomatoes and we stay with that crop, which seems to be the one to bring the most income per square foot, as we noticed, we are very apt to bring in diseases so that we do need to rotate. As far as challenges, I think the idea or the fact of good drainage, a well-located site is probably number one.
Brad, you want to add anything to that in terms of, you've seen quite a few crops, different crops, small fruits, veggies, across the whole range and many parts of Ohio and elsewhere. Again, your perspective on the challenges that the most experienced or some of the more experienced high tunnel growers are experiencing at this point?
Yeah, we've been working on high tunnels since '96 down at the Piketon Research Center, and we've looked at strawberries, we've looked at tomatoes, and I've worked with lots of growers over the years since getting into this. And some of the things we haven't talked about yet that I'd like to mention, I think, are very important, especially on tomatoes as well as the berries, the strawberries, is supplemental pollination on these tomatoes. A lot of my growers think just by rolling up the sides and letting that plant blow around a little bit, you're getting good pollination. I don't think, and I think we've seen a lot of good results both at the research center and on our growers' farms, is walking up and down through those rows once a day in the morning, somewhere after 10 o'clock and maybe before 2 o'clock, just with a leaf blower or a mist blower with no water in it, just to give those tomatoes a good whipping and let them get pollinated, because that's what pollinates a tomato crop. Most of you probably know that, but that crop has to move. And when we put them inside a tunnel, when they're not out in the natural wind, the natural environment, we've seen a lot of problems with pollination. there's been some definitions of high tunnels and whether they're heated, unheated. A lot of the growers I work with are actually putting some heat in. We've heard a few of the growers this morning talk about using wood burners and so forth. And I've seen too many problems with poor ventilation of those wood burners, or the wood burners have been homemade and they get a puff of smoke in there, or the greenhouse or the tunnel fills up with smoke. Do all you can to avoid those. And if you want to extend that season even more, I think we do need to heat them a little bit. Now, in Dave's case, with the hay grow system, those aren't really made to be a heated structure. Those are more just to extend the season, and they do well with that. But we can usually get a good end of June tomato crop just putting a little bit of heat in that high tunnel.
Questions from the audience? We're talking about integrated crop management. These would be major themes like crop selection, fertigation, fertility and irrigation management, when to plant, when you can expect to harvest, whether you're going to grow organically or conventionally. List goes on. Yeah, Kip.
Yeah, as you know, soil management's the big issue with organic. Can anybody speak to experiences on the best ways to manage soil in a high tunnel system, whether it's, you know, rotation of a green manure crop or bringing in compost or whatever? What are people's experiences? What works?
Go ahead, Brad.
Probably one of the growers I've worked with the longest in terms of high tunnel production. He's not here today, but Bill Fulton Farms over in Troy, Ohio. They're the longest running high tunnel producers I know of in the state, and we still don't have that worked out yet. Bill has a very good compost program. I got him in touch with a compost producer, a farmer that has gotten into that, and we're still fine-tuning that. But the use of compost within that planting bed, especially on a tomato crop, that's the key. But we still, and I think Matt's working on that too, we still don't have that fine-tuned yet. But utilizing that, I don't have any growers using a living cover crop in between crops in the tunnel.
Bob Jones, you're in the back. Would you mind commenting on soil management issues? I know that's been something you've paid a lot of attention to. If I could put you on the spot for one brief minute. I'm asking you. Sorry. Be what you see when you signed up. You didn't necessarily know.
Soil management obviously is key whether you're growing indoor or outdoor. There are several factors that you can do to manage the soil inside. We've tried a few of all of them. Living mulches in between the rows, raised bed with compost. Growing inside, it's a whole different world. I don't know how many of you remember the old Tomcast forecaster we used to have in field tomatoes years and years ago. Leaf wetness was the key thing they were measuring. Temperature, humidity, and leaf wetness. Well, if you grow in a hay grove or other structure, leaf wetness is what you're controlling. So you have far less disease issues to begin with. If you don't overwater, you have it on a good site, it's well drained, you're using compost or cover crops. Rye is just probably one of the most cleansing crops that we've ever grown, and so we always grow rye in between every crop. Even if it's only 6 inches tall, we turn it down and then plant the next crop, and that tends to really clean the soil up and helps us in our soil management.
Thank you for allowing me to put you on the spot. So rye rotation and rye cover cropping. Adam, did you want to say anything about that?
So we've been growing organically for 6 years, and what we do is bring in approximately about 7 cubic feet of compost per 80 square feet. That's just our bed size. So we know that we are coming in with that compost once a year at the beginning of our season, usually when we're tearing out our winter salad greens and switching over to our spring and summer crops. So we're doing that, and I think something that has kind of been mentioned but hasn't exactly been said is that in these environments, those levels of compost may seem a lot higher than you would have in field production, but we have higher temperatures and we also have higher humidity, so we're burning that organic matter off a lot faster in the tunnel than we actually are in the field. So it's not so much this is my field application rate, so that is our tunnel application rate. So, and I think that too, I've had experience trying to manage cover crops in a high tunnel environment, and while I think it works and there's definitely possibilities for it, it also becomes a balance of you're taking what may be a cash production or a cash crop production out and putting it in with something that you're not going to have cash coming in on. So if you can replace that with, say, a compost or something like that and serves the same function, that's a good way to go as well.
Thank you. Raymond, some of these comments make me think about, and I'm putting this to Raymond and the rest of the panel, it makes me think about ways we might either rethink what we do on the farm in terms of composting or taking one waste from one operation and putting it in as a resource in another, or even sharing that material among farms. Do you see, and I'm again putting the question first to you, but do you see an option for linking farms this way, whether they be, vegetable, dairy, grain, you name it, to help get at some of the issues that a high tunnel grower will face? Maybe in terms of compost production or soil management, land swapping, land sharing, what have you?
I would say that's something that possibly could happen or maybe should happen down the road. At this point, I do not see it happening in this area as of yet, but it would kind of come to the point where we may be able to say one man's trash is another man's treasure. By using compost coming from a dairy farm, etc., which we don't want to call compost trash, but that's what came to my mind to use as an example.
Brad, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, just with the, I think you got to be a professional at composting, and that's why the Bill Fulton and this farmer that I've worked with over the years, it works out good. This guy just makes compost. And just like Raymond says, we have in Hillsborough, Ohio, down Highland County, we have 2 livestock auctions there. And for years, all that waste and straw and everything was just getting spread on the fields. This farmer is actually getting paid by the livestock companies to take their waste, and then he's turned into compost. And that's what we're using in these tunnels then. So I think there is something there. You just, like Raymond says, you got to work out the logistics and get somebody specializing in that.
Question here from the audience?
Brad, how about, there's a lot of research on bark and mixes. We always talk about compost, we talk about breaking down straw or leaves or something like that. But isn't the research, when we put bark in, we can solve some of our disease problems? Go ahead and repeat the question. In other words, if we kick up the bark level perhaps in the compost?
Using bark levels in compost, if that's going to help out with the effectiveness of that compost. And I'm definitely no compost professional. We do have, don't we, Matt, a good compost program right here on this campus.
It's the Ohio Compost and Manure Management Program. For those with internet access, it would be OCAM for short, OCAMM.
And they are the professionals. This farmer who I worked with, when he approached me with the idea, I got him in touch with the OCAM folks, and that's why he's been doing such a good job. So yeah, I think the research is being done, not by me, but by these folks up here at Wooster.
Matt?
Yeah, go right ahead.
I guess one of the provisos, I think, with animal-based manure is salt, right? So the potential for salt accumulation in tunnels. And that's why some organic growers use kind of this vegetable-based compost. So,
Raymond, were you going to comment? Okay. We have, we'll get to this at, over the lunch hour and tour hour, but the tunnels that we will see have been managed organically for 4 years. Half of each tunnel have been receiving compost, and the other half have not been receiving anything. So once they were taken out of conventional grain vegetable rotation, that half of each tunnel has not been given any fertilizer, any compost or any supplemental material. The other half of each tunnel has been given compost. Now here it is November 14th. We have just the beginnings of a leafy vegetable crop in those tunnels. If you had been with us on the Organic Food and Farming Education Research Program Field Day in July, you would have seen tomatoes that were this big in the tomato plants that were this tall in the compost amended, and tomato plants that were this tall in the unamended half of each tunnel. So in my experience, and that's a dairy manure beginning of a compost, in my experience the compost matters for sure. But to bring up Ted's point about the salt, we have been watching it, but we're hopeful that the continued irrigation of the vegetable crops will help ameliorate that issue. Are there other we're going to, as you know, we're going to get into insect and disease and fertility and irrigation management in detail after lunch, okay? And so part of the reason for this segment is to set the stage for that. Are there questions that might be on your mind specific to insects, disease, or other issues in managing the crop from a holistic standpoint that can set the stage for us next time? Any questions of those kind, or you had a specific one?
Yeah, it's concerning cover crops.
It's concerning cover crops.
In between seasons. I ran into this legume that it's called fava, and I really, other than reading about it, supposedly what's the highest amount of organic compost back into the soil because of its tremendous growth.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if anybody could kind of expound on that.
Fava bean.
Fava bean.
Yeah, a legume, of course. A legume is going to fix nitrogen, and amongst other things. And it's not only adding nitrogen to the soil through the fixation process, but also because if you're returning the leftover material from the crop, it's going to be adding additional organic matter to the soil. I'm certainly not a cover cropping expert, but I can recommend one resource. If you don't have it on your bookshelf, you need to have it. It's called Managing Cover Crops Profitably. It's put out by the Sustainable Ag Research and Education Program from the USDA. Again, Managing Cover Crops Profitably. Very handy reference on cover crop selection and the pros and cons of each. It's right here. Carl came prepared. Unbelievable. This is a copy of the book, and if you want to see at least the cover, and I think the ordering information is on the inside, you'd want to track Carl down here. And you can download that, yeah.
Question for the panel on integrated crop management. A lot of times in even outdoor production, I'll try to go ahead and push the second crop in before I've actually taken the first crop off. What's your experience in overlapping crops in high tunnels? And what works well as far as trying to overlap? What doesn't work well?
From experience, actually, I brought one of the growers with me today that's experiencing this problem right now, but you plant that early crop for like tomatoes, plant it, it's already been mentioned today, around Christmas time, start seeding, go to the tunnel in February, end of February, early March, get your summer crop harvested in June and July. And if you're shooting for a fall crop, we want to be having that crop ripening and picking right now, which means an end of July planting date, early August. Ernest, who's going to be on the panel later, he's our auction manager as well, and he got a little busy this year and didn't get his crop planted till, when was it, Ernest? End of September, I think. Was it end of September? Middle of September. He's got a beautiful crop of tomatoes right now in full bloom, but we're going to run out of sunlight here. I'm afraid we're going to run out of sunlight here in December, early January. Maybe Otho knows more about this than I do, but the tomato is a fruiting vegetable and it needs that sunlight. He mentioned that in his talk there. You need that sunlight, and when our light levels go down, especially up north here, I'm from northern Iowa originally, and we get a lot more cloudier up here than we do down south. But in December and January, we're going to lose our light, and a fruiting vegetable is just not going to do it. So you got to, if you're going to schedule that tomato crop, you want to be picking your fall crop right now. And I would not suggest growing two in the same house. Have a separate house for your fall crop and then finish up that early one and give it a little break. There was one thing I wanted to mention, Matt, and Otho mentioned in his talk, was that intensity of that sunlight. Well, come June and July, nobody's mentioned, but we need to put some type of shade on those greenhouses for the tomatoes, because you'll get sunburn galore because the light intensity is just extreme in June and July. So putting on a 20% shade cloth, a whitewash, something to try to reduce that light intensity, or you're going to get a burning effect on the shoulders of that tomato, even with a good canopy.
I'll put in a plug right now for one of our exhibitors. Again, not stumping here, but along those lines in terms of the availability of different plastics to cover high tunnels. One of those plastics reduces the transmission of the heat-producing wavelengths. And I heard the comment over in Hershey, Pennsylvania this past February. It's like when you walk into the tunnel in July, it's almost like walking into the shade, even though you're in the full sun, because that plastic has cut out the infrared light like you keep your French fries warm under, okay? And so it's a heat-reducing plastic, but again, it's not doing much for the light intensity like you were talking about. So as you pay attention, there are obviously going to be additional innovations, not only in plastics, but other aspects of design and management that get at issues like you were just talking about. Yeah, Carl.
Do you know of anybody that swaps plastic during the seasons? For instance, putting a heat-reducing plastic on May to September, and then swapping that out with something that allows that sort of thing to happen?
Anybody swap plastic? I'm seeing a lot of shaking heads. I think it's probably a labor and a cost issue, if I had to guess. Shade cloth is easier, is what one comment. Yes, in the back.
I wondered if anyone who does rotations with any year, if anyone plants that fills in a green manure under the high tunnel, the way again to soil.
Green manure users?
I think Dave was just saying something about that.
Well, the one thing of this whole workshop is season extension, and that's where you hit a brick wall here, because when you extend the season, there's no time to put cover crop in there if you're trying to maximize everything to the tilt. So that's a tough one there.
It's a good point. We're extending the season, and we're going to have a season extension workshop at the Growers Congress on January 15th, where we talk about high tunnels and other techniques. And I think what Dave just said, what Otho said earlier, find what is profitable for you. It may be growing a crop. It may be using the tunnel in a different way. And I think there's at least in my experience, there's a fairly sizable proportion of the grower community who wants to have something in the tunnel growing at as much of the year as possible. Rob, you wanted to add something.
Last winter, down in Columbus in the Vegetable Congress, you had one of the speakers on the program, wasn't it, that talked about putting in growing mustard or a fumigation thing.
Yes.
And we were thinking already of the possibility of growing that outside in summer, and as you change crops, harvest it, bring it in, till it in, and you have a fumigation effect, and you can also put in compost and kind of speed up the system, in other words. Without going do you have any comments?
I'll just add on to that. Rob was saying that in January of 06, when we had a season extension workshop at the Growers Congress, much like we'll have this coming January of 07, one of our speakers was Frank Lowe's, L-O-U-W-S. He's with North Carolina State University, and he was talking about biofumigation. This is basically planting crops that are beneficial because they reduce nematode and other soil-borne disease issues. So if I heard you correctly, Rob was referring to that and saying, well, we could plant the biofumigants outside where they aren't taking up precious tunnel space, and then if we have a movable tunnel maybe, put the tunnel over that. Is that what you're saying, or did I lose you?
No, but I was bringing in the plants.
Or bring the plants into the tunnel, exactly. Again, I'm not a biofumigant expert, but what I understand is, yes, you'd get some benefit because the chemicals that are in the foliage of that mustard or other biofumigants will work. In total, you may have less effect because you've left the roots behind. But there could be some benefit. I see a number of hands going up on this issue. Yeah.